Hi guys, this is Black Prism, and this is an in-depth guide about Serum and what it's capable of. First of all, what is Serum? Well, Serum is a wavetable subtractive synthesizer. If you don't know what that means, first of all, a subtractive synthesizer is a synth that takes a complex waveform and removes part of it to create new sound. And the wavetable is a series of a couple waveforms that with Serum you can scroll through them and change them mid-sound. If you ever used Massive by Native Instruments, you should be very familiar with the concept of a wavetable synthesizer. Okay, let's get right into it. Serum has these four tabs: the Oscillator tab, the Effects tab, the Matrix, and the Global tab. The Oscillator tab is like the main part of the synth. This is where you practically make the actual sound. In the Effects section, you add all sorts of effects to the sound. In the Matrix, you control all the modulation done by envelopes, LFOs, macros, and stuff like that. And in the Global tab, you have all sorts of general settings. Let's start with the Oscillator part. The Oscillator part consists of two oscillators, a filter, a noise oscillator, and a sub-oscillator. Also the envelopes, the LFOs, the velocity and key tracking controls, the voicing controls, and the macros, which are global. Okay, for the actual oscillators, there are two oscillators, and the first one is active by default, but you can activate the second one as well. And in the oscillator you have the usual subtractive synthesis stuff. You got unison, and you can go up to 16 voices. Every voice is like an extra copy of the sound. That means having 16 voices means having 16 instances of the same wave. There's the detune knob, which controls how much you detune all the voices symmetrically to the root note. And the blend, which controls how loud are the other voices compared to the central voice. There is the phase knob, which basically controls where the wave starts, and the randomness knob, which controls the range of the randomness of the phase of all the unison voices. The phase knob is useful if you have a situation where you have two waves which cancel each other, so you can change the phase to avoid phase cancellation. And the randomness knob is useful if you want to make an effect where you have a bunch of unison voices and make them all start in the same phase and then drift apart from each other, which creates this effect. Also you have the basic pen and level control. Pen changes the penning from right to left, and the level controls the volume of the oscillator. There is this knob, which is the warp mode, and you can change the warp mode by right clicking on the off thing down here. There are a bunch of warp options available in Serum. I'll demonstrate some of them. The bend plus minus mode basically stretches the wave from the center to the sides. The asymmetric warp mode takes the center of the wave and shifts it from left to right. Also in the warp mode there are FM, AM and RM options that you can set from the other oscillator or from the sub-oscillator. And finally, to the core part of this, the wavetables. There are a bunch of wavetables available in Serum. You can access them by clicking here. And you can scroll through them by moving the wavetable position knob. You can see the entire wavetable by clicking on the waveform. In Serum you can actually create your own waveforms and wavetables, but I'll get to that later. I'll move to the sub-oscillator. The sub-oscillator is basically another oscillator, but with limited options for waveforms. You can choose either of those basic waveforms. You can change the pitch of it by octaves, you can change the panning, and you can change the level, which is the volume. You also have this direct out option, which you can toggle, which basically means it won't be affected by any of the filters or effects you apply to the sound. There is the noise oscillator, which creates noise, and you can choose a bunch of noise types by clicking here. You have all these normal options you would have on a normal oscillator, like pitch, level and panning. Also you have these two icons here. The bottom one changes the pitch of the noise according to the note you're playing. Normally the pitch of the noise is the same no matter what note you're playing, but pressing this will change the pitch according to the note. And this icon means you only play one cycle of the noise. Which brings us to another function of the noise oscillator, which it can be used as a sampler. If you, let's say, choose a tonal sound, like this one, then you can actually play it like a sampler. Now let's talk about the filter. The filter is one of Serum's strongest points, and it's super versatile in what it can do. First of all, let's go over the controls. Let's use this low pass filter for example. The cutoff changes the frequency where the filter cuts. The resonance creates a peak where the cutoff frequency is, which can create some cool effects. The panning knob changes the panning from left to right. The drive knob basically makes the sound louder and gives it some saturation. The fat, I'm actually not pretty sure, but it kinda does the same. And the mix changes the mix of the filter. Now this stuff on the side right here are what oscillators are routed to the filter. A and B represent oscillator A and oscillator B. N represents the noise oscillator and S the sub oscillator. Now this little piano icon right here is the key tracking, which basically changes the frequency of the cutoff according to the note you're playing. Now in Serum you have a lot of filters to choose from. You have the basic low pass, high pass, notch, band pass, all this stuff. But you also have multi-filters, which are basically two filters in one. Like this filter, which is a low pass filter and a high pass filter in one filter, and there are two frequency knobs which control the cutoff of each one. Also you have some special filters, like my favorite one, which is the comb filter, which can create some cool wacky sounds, like this one. Or stuff like the reverb filter, which can create an artificial reverb sort of effect. Now onto the envelopes and the LFOs. Like, this is where this type of synth really shines. Since in synthesizers like Serum or Massive, you can practically modulate everything. The envelopes are basic ADSR envelopes, and you can adjust the attack, decay, sustain, and release. You can also change them by dragging the little dots. Also, one thing that is important to note is that envelope 1 is by default the amplitude envelope, which means it controls the volume of the sound basically. Now the LFOs in Serum are very cool. They're not your traditional LFOs, since you can actually change the LFO shape to whatever you want. You just double click anywhere and you can move them around and change the tension, and you can also up the grid side to be more precise with the dots. With this you can basically create any shape that you want. You can also change the rate of the LFO. You can make it sync up with the BPM, or you can just have the rate controlled by Hertz. You can set the LFO to an either trigger mode, envelope mode, or turn it off completely. Trigger mode means that every time you press a note, the LFO will start from the beginning. Envelope mode means it will only run once, and off makes it behave like a normal LFO, meaning it just picks up where it left. Now, to modulate something, you just take the envelope or LFO and drag it to any knob or parameter that you want. For example, if you want to create a plug, you make an envelope shaped like this and drag it onto the cutoff frequency knob of a low pass filter and make it like go down really fast, which creates the plug effect. Now onto the voicing section. Here you can change the polyphony of the sounds, meaning how many notes you can play at the same time. You can also make a sound mono, which means you can only play one note at a time. You can of course enable legato and also portamento, which means glide between one note to the other. Changing the portamento knob will raise the glide time, and the rest of the stuff doesn't matter really. Here is an example for a portamento sound. Down here are the velocity and note control, which is basically a modulator which changes based on velocity and the note changes based on the key you're playing, basically like key tracking, which I showed you in the filter. You can also change the curve or the shape of the velocity and note control. You can use these overall to create some really cool effects, but honestly I don't use them much. Overall they are pretty fun, especially the key tracking one. You can do some really cool stuff with it. And lastly, the macro, which are like custom knobs which you can route to stuff, and then you can assign it to like your MIDI keyboard, or you can change it manually with the mouse, or you can automate it in your track to modulate everything you want. I'll show you an example. I'll route the macro to the cutoff and to the wavetable position, and I'll change it with my MIDI keyboard. Okay, that's it with the oscillator part. Now onto the effects section. As you can see, in the effects section you have a bunch of effects to choose from. I'll quickly go over all of them and explain what each one does. Let's start with the hyperdimension effect. The hyperdimension effect is basically two effects shoved into one, and its job is basically to give the sound stereo. The hyper effect gives the sound a really cool width to the sound. It sort of does like what unison and chorus does. And the other effect, the dimension expander, basically applies the Haas effect to the sound, which means it makes a delay between the right channel and the left channel to give an illusion that the sound has stereo. Usually when I apply the dimension expander effect, I like to keep the size kinda low and the mix halfway. The next effect is distortion. Here you have a bunch of distortion types to choose from. What a lot of people don't know about Serum is it actually have its own wave shaper. You need to choose the X shaper option and click on Edit B, and there you have a wave shaper. Anyway, you can filter the distortion. You can choose to filter pre-distortion or post-distortion. The drive knob basically pumps up the distortion, and the mix is the mix of the distortion with the sound. The next effect is a flanger. As far as a flanger goes, the options are pretty simple. You can also choose to sync up the flanger with the BPM. In some of the effects, like the phaser, the flanger and the chorus, I want to go over into what the knobs do really, because they are pretty much the same as other effects, and it's not a Serum specific thing, so if you want to know more about them, just search the effect you want to learn. But anyway, it does this effect to the sound. The next effect is the phaser. Again, you can sync it up with the BPM, pretty much the same as the flanger, and it does this effect to the sound. The chorus, same stuff. Also, important to note about the chorus is it gives the sound some stereo, so if you want some stereo and thickness to the sound, so the chorus is a good option. Anyway, it does this effect to the sound. The next effect is the delay. The feedback knob basically controls the intensity of the effect. Here you can choose the delay between each repetition of the sound for each channel individually. You can choose to sync it up with the BPM, or you can do it with milliseconds. Now this is a really cool part about Serum. You can actually filter your delay so it doesn't overpower the sound and just overall fits better in the mix. And you can also choose the delay type. The normal just repeats the sound in both channels. The ping pong alternates between the right channel and the left channel. And the tap delay option does what normal does, but with a slight delay. The next effect is the compressor. Here you have the normal compressor settings, but the cool part about Serum is this multiband option. When you enable this, it does basically what OTT does. It makes the sound really stand out in a mix and just overall sound better sometimes. The next effect is the reverb. I don't think I need to explain this one. You have an EQ option and you have two bands to choose from. You can make them a peak, a shelf or a cut filter, and for each one of them you can choose the frequency, the resonance and the gain. And the last effect is the filter, which is basically the same like the filter I showed you in the oscillator part, but in the effects part, although it has less options than the filter in the oscillator part. But it's basically the same, and you can choose the same filter types and stuff. Okay, we're done with the effects part, now on to the matrix. This is pretty simple, there isn't much to say about it. Basically every time you modulate something, it will show up in the filter. You can also modulate it from the matrix itself. When you click on the source, you can choose the source of the modulation, and in the destination you choose the parameter you want to modulate. What's cool about modulating stuff through the matrix is you have more options. For example, something you could do through the matrix is apply vibrato to the sound. Since Serum doesn't have a dedicated vibrato option, you can take an LFO and in the destination you choose master tune, which is basically the pitch of the sound. You make the LFO not sync up with the BPM, you choose like somewhere around 10 Hz, maybe a little bit less, and there you have the product. Something important to note about the matrix is you can modulate it from both sides. You can do it from the negative or the positive side. If you do it from the positive, it will go from up to down. If you do it from the negative side, it will go from down to up. Okay, and the last tab is the global. There isn't much to go through here. If you want to change the unison settings, you can do it through here. But the only useful thing here is you can choose the rate of the chaos. What chaos is basically a random modulation source, which you can only choose through the matrix. So if you look at the matrix, you can see chaos 1 and chaos 2 in the options for the modulation source. And the last thing I got to show you is the wave editor. In Serum you can create your own wave shapes and wavetable. So in the oscillator window there is a little pencil icon. So if you click on it, it opens up this window. You can create custom wave shapes through the given shapes. You can just click and drag it, or you can be a little more precise with it. You can also increase the grid size to make smaller edits, and also you can smooth it out if it looks a little bit rough with this option. Down here you can add more waves to create a wavetable. So click on it and just keep making this type of waves, and there you have basically a wavetable. But it's a little rough when you transition through it, so you can morph through each wave. If you click on the morph option, you have a couple options. They all do different stuff, and I won't get really into it, but I personally like to use the spectral morph. Anyway, now the wavetable is smooth. Also, you can create your own waves through the harmonic table. Each one of these bars represent a different harmonic, and its level represents the volume. And down here is the phase of each harmonic. You can mess around with the stuff to create new waves and really be precise with your wave creation if you really understand in this stuff. Lastly, I'll show you how you can create your own wavetables through importing a sample. If you take a sample and just drag it to the oscillator screen, you have a bunch of options here. Don't worry about it. Usually it's better to choose a fixed frame time. I'll go for the 1000. Now if you go back to the wave editor, you can see all the actual waves you have available. I suggest you remove all the empty ones since they're just silence. And then you have a wavetable. You can morph through them, you can add effects to them, like if you click here, you can see you can squarify them. That means you remove each even harmonic, which creates sort of a hollow sound. You can also normalize the waves, you can just mess around with it, and yeah, make your own wavetables, why not? And yeah, that's basically it. I hope that you learned something new in this tutorial. Serum really is a powerful synth, and it's the synth I use the most, honestly. If you have suggestions for other tutorials, please leave them in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.